Welcome back. In this outcome, we're going to compare operating systems fairly, weighing them up through four practical lenses: how you interact with them, how easy they are to use, the training they demand, and of course, what they cost. Different operating systems suit different people, devices, and budgets, so how do we compare them sensibly? This outcome sets out four lenses. There's HCI, or human-computer interaction, which is how you actually interact with the system. Ease of use, meaning how simple it is for an ordinary person. The training a user or organization needs to pick up. And cost, covering the software, licenses, and support. The honest takeaway is that there's no single best OS, only the right one for the job. It's worth remembering just how many kinds of device run an operating system. On desktops and laptops, you'll meet Windows 11, Mac OS, and Linux. On phones and tablets, it's Android and iOS, built around touch. Servers lean on Windows Server and Linux for rock-solid reliability, while cut-down embedded systems live inside cars, televisions, and appliances. And at the specialist end, there are mainframe and real-time systems handling critical tasks. Each of those is shaped by what it has to do. A desktop system balances features, compatibility, and ease of use for everyday work, whereas a mobile OS prioritizes touch, battery life, and its app store. Server systems are all about stability and running for months without a reboot. And embedded systems stay small and efficient because the hardware is limited. A real-time system goes further still, having to respond within strict time limits, and all of those choices ripple through to the interface, the skills needed, and the price. Let's meet the main kinds of interface. A CLI, or command line interface, is where you type text commands, like the Windows command prompt or a Linux shell. A GUI, the graphical user interface, is the familiar world of windows, icons, menus, and a pointer. A touch interface is really a GUI designed for fingers, using taps and swipes as on your phone, and a voice or natural interface lets you simply speak, the way you would to a digital assistant. Let's put the two classic styles head to head. A CLI gives you a prompt where you type precise commands, while a GUI shows windows and icons you point at and click. Beginners nearly always find the GUI easier, but skilled users often find the CLI faster and more powerful. In truth, most systems give you both. Windows has its friendly desktop, and tucked behind it, the command prompt and PowerShell. Each style has clear trade-offs. The command line is fast and precise, sips very little memory, works even over a slow remote connection, and is easy to automate with scripts, though you do have to memorize the commands and a single typo can bite. The graphical interface is intuitive and lets you see your options rather than recall them, which is lovely for browsing, design, and everyday tasks, but it uses more memory and can be slower for big, repetitive jobs. Neither is simply better. It depends who's driving. Look across the popular systems and you'll see the same idea dressed differently. Windows gives you a start menu, a taskbar, and windows, familiar to almost everyone. Mac OS has its dock and menu bar and a famously polished, consistent look. Linux lets you pick your desktop, GNOME or KDE, for instance, on top of a powerful shell, while Android and iOS drop the desktop altogether for home screens full of apps. Different looks, but every one of them is really just a way to launch programs and manage files. Here's a nice illustration. Say you want to copy a file into a backup folder. On Windows, you'd drag it in File Explorer, or right-click and choose Copy, then Paste. On a Mac, you'd drag it in Finder or press Command C, then Command V, and on a Linux shell, you'd simply type cp, the file name, and the destination, then press Enter. The end result is identical, only the way you got there changed, and a beginner might love the drag and drop while an expert finds typing quicker. How much of what you know carries over from one system to another? Happily, most everyday skills transfer. Using a mouse, opening apps, saving files, and browsing the web feel much the same everywhere. But each OS has its own habits, where the settings live, the keyboard shortcuts, and how you install software all differ. Linux and server work often call for command-line skills, whereas Windows and macOS can be run almost entirely through the GUI. So moving across does take a little retraining, even for confident users. It helps to think about who typically uses each system and what they need to learn. Windows sits in homes, offices, and schools and asks very little, since its GUI is widely taught. macOS is a favorite in creative and education settings, needing only a little adjustment to different shortcuts and layout. Linux, popular with developers and on servers, often demands command-line confidence, while Android and iOS are picked up almost instantly. Full server administration, by contrast, needs real skill in security and networking. Ease of use, it turns out, depends as much on your background as on the OS itself. For an organization, switching system means retraining staff, and that costs time and money. Sticking with a familiar system, often Windows in a UK office, keeps those training costs down because most people already know it, whereas specialist systems may need certified courses, like a Linux or Cisco qualification. So training is a genuine, ongoing cost that has to be weighed right alongside the price of the software. Picture a small UK charity thinking about moving its office PCs from Windows to Ubuntu Linux to save money. On paper, the licenses are free, which cuts direct costs straight away. But staff who know Windows would need training on the new desktop and applications. Some familiar programs would need swapping out. LibreOffice in place of Microsoft Office, say, and during the changeover productivity might dip while support requests climb. The lesson is that the saving on licenses has to be balanced against the training time and the short-term disruption. Let's talk actual money, bearing in mind these figures are illustrative and do drift over time. Windows 11. Home and Pro are bought per device, somewhere around £100 to £220. Windows Server costs far more and is licensed by processor and by users. macOS is free to update but only runs on Apple hardware, which you pay a premium for. And Linux distributions like Ubuntu are simply free to download and use. Behind those prices sit two different philosophies. Proprietary systems like Windows and macOS are sold under a paid license and keep their source code locked away. Open source systems like Linux are usually free and publish their code for anyone to inspect, though you can still pay for optional professional support from a company like Red Hat. And do take the license seriously. It sets out how many devices or users the software may run on, and breaking that agreement is unlawful and can prove expensive. The smart way to compare is by total cost of ownership, not just the sticker price. Windows and macOS carry a paid license tied to a device or to Apple hardware, while Linux is usually free. Support might be included, bought from a vendor, or drawn from the community. Training may cost nothing if staff already know the system, or plenty if they don't. And where paid systems sometimes need paid apps, Linux often has free alternatives and will happily run on older hardware too. So let's hear both sides of the argument. The case for paying with Windows or Mac OS is that they're familiar and so cheap to train on. They enjoy wide software and hardware compatibility, and they come with professional support and regular updates that businesses and schools trust. The case for free with Linux is no license fee, excellent performance on older and cheaper hardware, and real security and stability for servers, though you may need more skilled staff and some retraining. Both are perfectly reasonable, depending on your situation. Which brings us to the judgment this outcome really wants. The cheapest license is not always the cheapest overall. Free Linux can cost more once you add training and support, while paid Windows can work out cheaper simply because staff already know it. The right answer depends on the organization, its budget, its people's skills, and the job the computers must do. For a typical UK office, familiar paid systems often give the lowest total cost, but for servers or tight budget projects, free Linux frequently wins. The trick is to weigh license, support, training, and hardware together. Let's draw this outcome together. We compare operating systems through HCI, ease of use, training, and cost. Different devices, desktop, mobile, server, embedded, and specialized, call for different systems, and their interfaces range from the command line to graphical and touch, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. Skills mostly transfer, but every OS needs a little retraining, and cost is best judged as total cost of ownership, license, support, training, and hardware combined, rather than the license price alone. So that's how we weigh one operating system against another, not by picking a favorite, but by matching the system to the people, the device, and the budget. If you'd like to explore further, the classic texts by Silberschatz, Tannenbaum, and Stallings give you the deeper theory behind these choices. For the practical side, Microsoft Learn, the Linux Documentation Project, and the National Cybersecurity Center are all worth a visit, and the StatCounter market share reports are handy when you're comparing mobile systems. Have a look at the migration case studies too, and do reference any UK Versity slides you draw on in your assignment.